In our last session, I described that we're stepping back onto our rice paper road, because when we look at the end times and we try to interpret it, we recognise that we are trying to bring an interpretation, and we have to be humble enough to say, I might not have got all of this right. And my intention through Bite Size Bible has always been to try to present a balanced view of what the Bible says, to allow you to form an informed opinion and an informed view of what you understand God's saying. When we look at end times, there are a number of controversies, and in the last session we touched on the controversy about Israel. When we read through end times and we read about the people of God and the focus of the end times and the tribulation on the temple of God, on the city of Jerusalem, on the nation of Israel, and we see clearly that the Bible has prophesied that the end times is going to have a focus on Israel. We find ourselves battling with passages like Romans 11, where Paul talks about us as Christians who are not Jews being ingrafted branches, where we become part of the vine. And we find ourselves with this controversy of, when we read through Revelation, is it speaking about the whole church, or is it speaking about the nation of Israel? It's an area of controversy of whether the believers in the church will go through the tribulation or not. And this is an area that I want us to begin to explore. We've already seen controversially that Jesus has challenged us to be ready for his return at any time, but then said that there are certain things that need to happen first that we haven't seen fulfilled. And the challenge for us is how we respond to that. Are we ready for Jesus' return? Are we excited for his return? Are we looking for his return? Would we welcome his return? And just because something hasn't happened yet doesn't mean that it couldn't happen at any time. But we do recognise there is a controversy or a tension between those two ideas. We've also seen the controversy or the debate around the Antichrist. Now, the Antichrist is not something that we usually talk about, but we see that there are two possibilities. We look at all of that incredible history in Daniel, all of the way that Daniel and Paul and Jesus and John tie these different books of the Bible together, written centuries apart and yet united together. And then we see that we've got two equally possible ideas, that the Antichrist appears in Revelation 6 on a white horse, or he's brought out of the, raised up by the dragon, raised up by Satan as the beast. We've also seen that the tribulation, and we've talked about this being focused on Israel, focused on the temple, with a timetable of 1/7 still to happen, one set of 7 years still to happen, that will be split into two halves with a peace treaty that then is broken halfway through, with severe hostility and opposition to the people of God. But it leaves us with this question of whether what we read in Revelation relates to Israel as a nation or to the church. Where does the church fit into all of this? Right back in the very beginning of this series on the end times, I threw out a few names and a few sort of descriptions of things that maybe we hear over time, like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, the tribulation, the Antichrist. Some of the other things I've thrown out in that was the idea of words like the rapture or the millennium. Where do these things fit? I've been a Christian for many years, and personally I have to say that looking at this has been an area as a Christian I've resisted going into for many years. I often thought that when you started talking about the rapture, you were beginning to get into the idea of the loony wing of the Christian church. That the people who were focused on that tended to be your weirdos who would sit on the extreme edges of the church, Christians who were tied up with conspiracy theories. And for many years, I have to confess, it's something that I've resisted looking at. But we do need to understand what the Bible has to say. And what we're going to look at over our next few sessions is to try to disentangle the myth, some of the hype, some of what maybe has become Western Christianity's interpretation of something, where sometimes the American church will dominate some of the teachings in areas that actually, if we're not careful, we get away from what the Bible actually says. I want us to build our faith on the solid bedrock of what the Bible has to say. And over the next few sessions, I want us to begin to disentangle the myth from what the Bible says. I want us to begin to see that some of these things, like the rapture and the millennium, are rooted in what the Bible has to say. And even though some of them might seem not out of place in a Marvel film, God has a purpose for these to help us to know how to trust him, but also offer salvation to others.